Okay, so let's continue. So we stopped at the two rules for profit maximization, and the first one is the decision of the firm. So the firm is going to produce up to the point when the cost of producing the additional unit of output, which is basically how much they're going to be paying for the worker, the marginal cost, is equal to the revenue obtained from selling that product, which is the marginal revenue. Okay, so when you think about the marginal revenue, when you think about the total revenue function, TR is the price that you are selling the goods for and how many units they are able to sell. So when we talk about the marginal revenue, it's the change in the total revenue because of the change in sales or change in Q, which is the production. Okay, so this is the marginal revenue function. So that's why it's basically the change in the revenue obtained from selling that output. All right, and then the marginal productivity condition is hiring decision is made up to the point when the value, and this is important, so the dollar value of the marginal product is equal to the added cost of hiring the worker, which is basically the wage. Okay, so when you think about the total cost function, so the total cost is wage rate times how many units employed, how many workers, plus the interest rate times how many units of capital used. But since we are assuming that this part is fixed, right, does not change, we are kind of focusing on this part. So when we say that there is a change, anytime there is a change in the total cost, this change has to come from the change in E, because the W is in a perfectly competitive firm, they cannot change the W, right? They cannot change the wage. They are getting whatever the wage rate set by the market. Okay, so that's why we can always write that the change in E, like you can change in number of workers employed, is simply equal to the change in the total cost divided by W. Okay. Also, we can think about the production function. So the production function, we already said that there is a production function which is a function of workers and capital. And again, we're not talking about this now, so we're just focusing on E. So the marginal productivity of workers is simply equal to the change in production because of an additional worker holding capital constant. So we can also write the change in E as the change in Q divided by the MPE. Okay? So if we go back to this point here, let me just erase this so I can write. So if we go back to this point here, and I'm seeing that there is a change in E here and there is a change in E here, so I can actually substitute this part right here. So I can rewrite this equation as the change in the total cost is equal to the wage rate, which is fixed, which is constant. You don't have to write the bar all the time, but just like remember, it's just constant. Okay, so it's equal to W times, instead of the change in E, I'm going to substitute it with this part, which is the change in production over the marginal productivity of workers. And we know that there is an important assumption in which we say that the change in Q is just 1. Every time I'm just changing 1 unit of production. Okay? And this is especially when I talk about marginal, additional. So this is for the marginal cost. So I can always say that anytime I'm talking about marginal cost or additional cost, then I'm talking about just 1 unit. So I can go ahead and rewrite this equation for the marginal cost. So the marginal cost is equal to W times, it's just 1 unit, over marginal productivity of workers. I can always write it as, in the next slide, MC is equal to W over MPE. And this brings us to, so this one is just a slide that we can delete later, okay? But here, so this brings us to the same equation, right? The one that I just wrote here. The marginal cost is equal to W over MPE. So the marginal cost is equal to W over MPE, right? It's the same thing as 1 over MPE. All right, so this one is telling us that they would produce up to the point where the marginal cost is equal to the wage rate divided by the marginal productivity of capital. But we know that the marginal cost is equal to the price, okay? So the marginal cost of production is basically equal to the price, and this is for the competitive firm. We always say that there is a condition marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue, but in a perfectly competitive firm, the marginal revenue is equal to the price. So we can go ahead and replace the marginal cost for the price. So we can rewrite this one as replacing this one, P, for the marginal cost. So we can rewrite it this way. So this is what we call the mathematics of the marginal productivity theory. But there are some critiques on this theory. Many times the way that decisions are made related to the employers, how they make their hiring decisions, at many times it's just too far from reality, right? Another criticism is that the assumptions of the theory are not very realistic. Okay, so every time we're not assuming that employers are always making this mathematical decision and have the graph and have the chart and they're going to compare the marginal revenue versus the marginal cost. Prices are not fixed and are not given. The same thing for the wages and interest rate. So many of the assumptions offered by the theory are not realistic. Okay, and also employers, they might not know anything about the theory, they just applying for the job. So at many times there is no relevance between what the theory is saying and our real life. The short run demand curve for workers, like any demand curve, has the number of units demanded. Here we have workers versus how much you're paying, which is the wage. So it's a negatively related, right, relationship. Okay, and for example, here at this point here we have 30 workers are hired and they are paying $20 per hour, right? What if the wage rate decreases? Then they are going to be hiring more workers, right? And they're going to be hiring at this point, instead of 30, they're going to be hiring 60. So the impact of the change in the wage has an effect on the number of workers employed. So the output decision, they want to reach this point where the marginal cost is equal to the price. And you can think in the back of your head, it's just the marginal revenue. So in this graph, we are talking about these two. And these two, you have it in mind that they are actually the same. So we have an output price that is a certain constant. As you can see, it's constant along the way. Any level of production, we have the same price. Again, it's not realistic, but this is the assumptions of the theory. So they're going to produce up to the point where the marginal cost equates the marginal revenue or the output price. And this is the optimal amount of production, which is Q star. Okay, and in the long run, they're going also to be maximizing their profit by choosing how many workers to hire and how much plant and equipment. So the K is gonna change in the long run. So anytime we are just talking about the short run, remember, here we have the short run. Here we have the short run. We didn't have any capital in our decision here. It's just all about workers. But whenever we talk about the long run, and there is no specific cut off between the short run and the long run, but it's like usually 5 years. So the change in plants and equipment. So now we will start to change capital in the long run. And there is an important tool to be used in order to decide which is the best attainable combination between workers and capital that would produce the same level of output. Okay, and I hope this is reminding you of the previous chapter when we were talking about the indifference curves. So the isoquant curves are just the firm's version of the indifference curve for the workers. So in the indifference curve, we were talking about like two goods, and we had an indifference curve, and these two goods are leisure time and consumption, right? And we said we can make different combinations along this indifference curve that would give the same amount of utility satisfaction or utilities. So any point along this curve would give the same amount of utility. Okay, so we have here the same idea. Whenever we talk about this is the indifference curve, IC. Whenever we talk about isoquant curves, it's the same idea but from the firm's point of view. So we have workers and we have capital, and we have different combinations that will produce not the same level, sorry, this should be on the line, not the same level of utility, but we are talking about the same level of output. So different combinations of K and L that by the end of the day would give me the same amount of output, let's say 100 units. Okay, so it's the same idea as the indifference curve. The higher the isoquant, the higher the output. So output at Q1 is higher than Q0. ISO cost is equivalent to the budget line for the consumer or the workers in our previous chapter. So we are talking about ISO cost lines that give us different combinations of the two goods the two resources that we have, labor and capital, that would give us the same level of cost. So the total cost is the same along any point on that line. But of course, the higher the ISO cost line, the higher the cost. Okay, so it's exactly the same idea as the budget line for the workers in our previous chapter. So we have employment, we have capital, we have different combinations of workers and capital where you are paying just here for workers because you have zero capital, or you have zero workers and all the resources are going to, or all the cost is coming from the capital. And along this line, we have a different combination between workers or employees, I should say, workers, and capital that would give the same amount of cost. The higher ISO cost, the higher the total cost that the firm has to pay. Okay, and again, optimal combination, we are looking at the point of tangency between the isoquant and the ISO cost. So point P is our optimal point because it's the point of the highest isoquant that is tangent to the ISO cost line. So here the firm is employing 100 units of workers and 75 units of capital. Point A would give the same amount of production, but actually it's unattainable because it's on a higher ISO cost. In order to attain A, you have to be on a higher ISO cost line, so it's basically unattainable. And the same goes for point B. Okay, so all other combinations lie on a higher ISO cost like point A and point B. Cost minimization is the same idea as profit maximization, so you can think of it as they choose to the least cost combination between capital and labor. Okay, so again, it's the point of tangency, and they're going to reach this point of tangency by solving this equality between the marginal rate of substitution has to be equal to the ratio of the two prices. Okay, so the ratio of the two prices, which is the W over R, and the marginal rate of substitution, how much I'm substituting capital for workers. So this is called the marginal rate of substitution, and this is called the ratio of prices. So we are going to reach the optimal decision when we get this equality. Okay, so let me stop here and continue the next one.